Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp, Adams, and Benjamin Wolk out on the road, but was not going to miss this Junkyard Dawgcast. Appreciate everyone who is tuning in and watching us live. Busy week as we get ready for what essentially makes the halfway point for Georgia. They're going to play Vanderbilt on Saturday and then have their bye week. But a lot to discuss. But Kipp, I think we got to start with you. You got to see the biggest show of the week when it comes to Georgia sports on Monday night. Got a chance to be there live for the Braves and the Phillies. How are we feeling the next day, and where does that one rank for you as a fan, being able to be there in person for that one?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, guys. I'm feeling it. That game took a lot out of me, and you know what? For anyone just talking about baseball as kind of being, just not an exciting sport, as far as pacing's concerned compared to, football or basketball. That might be true, but the payoff, when you get to postseason and you have what I was able to witness last night, I mean, there are so many different ways that you can win a baseball game, but I've never seen anything like that. And that's why baseball's so special. It's just, it's a stat-based sport, and it's still you find ways to have things that had never happened before, and early on in that game, looked like the Braves were going to get no hit. They hadn't even scored, had a hit, and I think it was like 2 outs in the 6th. And, Riley's at the plate with 2 outs and a 3-2 count and, gets Atlanta back in the lead. But that play to end the game, having just an amazing catch by, Michael Harris and just that flip to first to get Harper for the double play. It's an all-timer for me. And I mean, can say I'm old enough to say I was, there in 92, went to games in 91 at the beginning of that early run, but it's still, that was an incredible, an all-time astonishing play to end an amazing game. And for anyone trying to say that Truist Park, isn't an electric environment, you weren't there last night. You missed out on just an incredible experience, and hopefully Atlanta will get to have some more home games this postseason, because that was special for me, and it's exactly what that Braves team needed with their backs against the wall, literally.
I'd like to apologize to any of my neighbors who heard me last night. I was causing a scene after watching, like Kipp mentioned, like the first 6 innings, like with my hands over and I was like, this is not going to go well. Ben, I don't know if you followed any of that game, but that was
I was actually in Hartsfield-Jackson at the time, and it went when Austin Riley hit his home run. The whole place, like, I don't know if I've ever been in an airport before where all of a sudden there was just a bunch of loud noises being made and everybody was okay with it. It was a socially acceptable thing to do, but yeah, it was felt all around Atlanta.
No doubt about it. Well, let's talk about some of the noise that was made Saturday night in Sanford Stadium, going back to Georgia's big win over Kentucky, 51-13. Kipp, you wrapped up that game with the post-game podcast talking about that one, and figured we would circle back. And I'll start with you, actually, Ben. Tell me what sort of stands out to you a few days removed from that big win over Kentucky. What kind of sticks with you as we get ready for the next game for Georgia?
Well, I think what really sticks with me is what probably sticks with most people. When Georgia I've been annoyed at times about the start slow, start fast conversation, just because it's like, to me, an oversimplification of what's going on. But when you score touchdowns on your first 3 possessions and you're up 21 points, Georgia is still going to be the same old Georgia. I mean, when you get to the point where Georgia's able to pin its ears back and get after the quarterback, that you're not really able to establish the run to get back into the game, Georgia's going to still dominate you. That has not changed. And so I think that Georgia has done teams some scoreboard favors here early in the season to keep them in position for games to be competitive. I think that what we saw against Kentucky is further validation to me that the second half of the South Carolina game, that, after they fell behind 10 against Auburn, that the things that happened after those moments are more indicative of anything that happened prior to those moments. That said, I do think that, we saw it a week ago when Georgia went on the road to Auburn and struggled. Kirby mentioned this. This was really Kentucky's first road test And they obviously struggled mightily as well. And so one thing that I don't want to overreact to how close it was against Auburn. I also don't want to overreact to the fact that they won by 38 against Kentucky, because I think that Georgia played a pretty, perfect football game, all things considered, and Kentucky certainly didn't. So I think that probably created the gap on the scoreboard maybe more than there should have been, much like the gap on the scoreboard was probably closer than it should have been in a couple of the last SEC games as well.
Kind of going off of what you said, Ben, when it came to Kentucky, and I wrote about this in my rewatch story, I could not get over how undisciplined they were, especially early in that game. I mean, you had one of the linemen kind of falling on Zion Logue after one play, got a personal foul, just a couple of boneheaded decisions. Deion Walker, one of their best players, nailing Cedric Van Pran on that, fumble recovery return that wasn't. It was just, to me, that was really bizarre to see Kentucky be so undisciplined in a game that they had to understand, hey, we got to play 4 really good quarters to have a shot. Looking at it from the Georgia perspective, I thought the offense looked great. I think Mike Bobo's done a tremendous job so far this season in how he's called plays and even just setting up certain plays. When we talked to Kirby after the game, I was a little caught off guard. He was like, so much of our success tonight was because of the run game. And I was like, they didn't really run the ball that well. But if you went back and looked, there were several play action moments, several plays where you could tell Kentucky had to account for the run, and it allowed for opportunities. There was a big pass from Carson Beck to Brock Bowers for about 25 yards on a 3rd and 1. And, we were all thinking they're going to try to run the ball and just try to push up in there and get the first down. And, they bid on play action, and Brock Bowers was running down the field open, and Carson hits him. And even at one point, one of the plays I really liked that I don't think wound up working, there might have been a hold on this play. They lined up like they were going to do the tush push on like 3rd and short, and Carson drops back and looks to throw. Like I like that creativity, and I like the fact that they're going to keep defenses guessing. I thought on the whole, very, very productive day for Georgia on offense. And if you're a Georgia fan that's been worried at any point about this offense, I think you should feel really good from what they showed against Kentucky. Kipp, what about you? What's sort of still sticking with you about that Kentucky game and what we got to see from the Bulldogs?
Well, I said this immediately after the game. I thought, this was kind of the game where we're starting to see what Georgia's identity is. And I mean, this offense now leading the SEC in passing yards right now, but also starting to find out, kind of what they have with their personnel. Just look at Dejon Edwards and what he did in this game. You're talking about the run game, but also, we've been talking about, well, they're probably not going to have a replacement for a guy like Kenny McIntosh or James Cook, a guy who can catch passes out of the backfield. But Edwards had 6 catches for 51 yards in this game. And it's just, that's an element that it allows you to kind of open things up and make you a little bit more unpredictable, even in your run game. I mean, when you have Edwards back there, or, whether it's Dylan Bell or, even Cash Jones out there, defenses can't just be ready for, a straight off tackle or even a toss sweep. They have to consider that you have a potential pass catcher out of the backfield, and they have to plan for that. And it helps you all across this offense. And I think you start to look now with, Ladd McConkey starting to get back into it. They have 10 guys with at least 10 catches so far this season at the halfway point. So, yeah, Carson Beck's got weapons, and whenever that pocket's clean, he showed what he can do. So you have to look at the offensive line and say, okay, I think these guys are starting to gel, even, battling through injuries and having to replace guys, having to even replace a guy like Cedric Van Pran during the game. You're still able to have a touchdown drive there. I think you just starting to see the potential a little bit. And speaking of potential, I mean, I think we're starting to see what a guy like Ra Thomas can do out there. We've kind of seen glimpses, but he showed that he's good for, a huge catch, I guess, every game now. He's become that catch radius 50-50 ball guy that I think Carson knows he could just throw it to him, and he's got a chance to make a big play with a guy like Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint being as dependable as receiver as you can have, regardless of the route being run. He's a guy that can get yards after the catch. He showed that. He's tough, fearless. There are weapons on this Georgia offense that are not named Brock Bowers. And I think that's something huge for this team, as they still have some pretty, important games to go over the second half of this season.
You hit on some really good points there, Kipp, when it comes to Georgia's offensive line. I feel like they've done a very good job. And, I feel like run blocking has been the biggest question. You saw improvement there, but they continue to do a very good job of protecting Carson Beck. And Ra Thomas, I wrote this in that rewatch story. I think he's going to be the second leading receiver for this team when it's all said and done, behind just Brock Bowers. Rara's been really impressive. And it was funny being there live, and Ben, you can attest to this, when they called that incomplete, that touchdown. And I don't know, Ben, if you got a good look at it, but they only showed one replay, and I was sitting there going, I think he got it. And it was sort of like, I think he came down with that. I've been super impressed with Ra. I think he's a guy that's going to make a lot of plays for this offense going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I like your call on Ra being the second leading receiver. I think Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint can put up a fight for it. I feel like, Kipp, you mentioned Daijun Edwards. I feel like he never really gets the full respect he deserves for as good of a back as he is. I think Marcus has a similar thing going at the receiver position. He's just been around for so long. I think people get so comfortable with guys and they've seen him for so long. Sometimes they just, I don't want to say get bored of them, but it's like they just heard their names for so long that you almost forget what you have. And I think that Georgia has that right now with Daijun and Marcus Rosemy, two guys that you can really count on as leaders, two guys that you can really count on to be more productive than I think people give them credit for.
Yeah, Marcus Rosemy, he had some injuries early on, but he had some big catches. Obviously, the one against Florida where he gets hurt early on kind of set him back. But, yeah, since he's got to Georgia, his hands have never really been in question. He's probably not going to be a guy that, tears up the combine as a 4.3 guy, but he brings everything else to the table. And I think that's, you got these guys through the transfer portal that, are the new toys, and Dominic Lovett and Ra. And that fans like, the new faces, because it's, you see, unrealized potential. But I do think Marcus Rosemy, this was a big year for him to step up. He has so far. And here we are again, Georgia continuing to lose wide receivers, whether it's injury or the transfer portal. But I don't think that passing game has taken a step back. In fact, it's, the most explosive it's ever been.
The portal has really helped out Georgia. Just ask Mark Stoops. We are going to take a quick break and come back and turn the page to Vanderbilt, getting ready for Georgia's second road game of the season. Talk a little bit about that and what we expect to see in Nashville on Saturday. Welcome back, everybody. We'll turn in the page to the seventh game of the season for Georgia, getting ready for just their second road game going to Vanderbilt. It'll be 11 a.m. local time kick. We'll be up nice and early for that one. Going back to Monday's interviews, Kirby had a lot of positive things to say about Clark Lee, the job he's done. He talked about Clark and what he's done for the other SEC coaches when they have those spring meetings, the way he's worked with everybody else. This is a Vanderbilt team that really needs to find itself on a 5-game losing streak. Start of the year by beating Hawaii and Alabama A&M, and not much has gone right since then. At this point, I feel like Vanderbilt's most positive asset, or the thing that's been working for them a little bit, has been the passing game, and Kirby talked a little bit about that. Ken Sills, who's been there for 2 or 3 years at this point, stepping in for A.J. Swan, has had some pretty productive games, albeit in losses these last few weeks. Besides that, I think Georgia taking on the chance to go to Nashville. We know that the road environment there is not going to be quite like what they experienced in Jordan-Hare there at Auburn. But another chance for Georgia to go on the road and show if they can carry over what was a very productive win over Kentucky. I'll start with you, Kipp. What do you want to see out of this matchup with Vanderbilt? What intrigues you the most from the Georgia perspective about what they got to do against the Commodores?
Well, I think this is a game where Georgia can be aggressive a little bit defensively and force turnovers. This is a Vanderbilt team that's thrown 8 interceptions this year, and I think lost 5 fumbles. So it's a situation where you should be able to get your offense the ball and get some early possessions in this game in the first half, in a season where we've kind of talked about how quickly these games go with the clock rolls, but getting a couple extra possessions could allow Georgia to put themselves in a good situation at halftime. Continue to play good first half football. You showed that against Kentucky. Good things happen whenever you do come out and have a strong start offensively. So continue that with some extra possessions against Vanderbilt, so you can go into halftime not having to make quite as many adjustments as you've had to make so far this year. When talking about the defense, I think it's been solid, but I think really in the second half is when you've kind of see them buckle down, make those adjustments at halftime, and play the kind of defense Georgia's known for. How about getting that done in the first half so that you can play a complete game? And again, I think for Georgia, you have a chance to break the longest regular season winning streak in the SEC. It's at 33 right now, tied with Tennessee back in the late 30s. So you have something to play for in this game. So go out there and show that you can wake up for a noon kickoff and get the job done.
Ben, how about you? What sort of stands out to you about this matchup? What Georgia is getting into with this game?
Well, to give an idea, you mentioned we don't really expect this to be the same road environment that they faced in Auburn. Kirby Smart said in his post-game press conference, this was really Kentucky's first true road test when he was talking about them coming to Athens last weekend. They have already played a road game in Nashville. So Kirby was almost acknowledging post-game that Kentucky hadn't really faced a real road environment. So I don't think Georgia's necessarily expecting a real road environment on Saturday in Nashville. I think, the schedule's set up nicely for Georgia. I feel like with that 4-game stretch, and obviously that Florida game, hand up, Kipp, that Florida game's not looking too, daunting there at the end of the month. But that 4-game stretch, Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, I think I got those two flip-flop, Ole Miss, Tennessee. But that stretch is obviously going to be the stretch of Georgia season where we find out, what this team is really made of. And I think, I don't want to say having an SEC game where you can get a little bit healthy and then go into your bye week. But I think that is what's most important about this game against Vanderbilt, that Georgia comes out on the other side as healthy as possible so they can get even healthier heading into that 4-week stretch where, bodies are going to be very tired.
Yeah, I think you hit on it, that the schedule set up well for Georgia when it comes to this. Now, having said that, I have a feeling that Kirby is really going to harp on these guys that they have to show up ready to play. He was asked about that 2016 loss, a very, very ugly loss at home to Vanderbilt, and he didn't say a whole lot, but you have to know that that's in the back of his mind, that was a very poor performance in his first season. And since then, it's not been very close. The last 2 times they've played Vanderbilt, I believe, Georgia has outscored them 117-0. So, I think they do want to show up and show out, but it sets up well. And, it's kind of funny looking at where this team has gone. They started the year really banged up, and slowly but surely, I think they've been getting healthier and healthier. And for it to set up the way it has to get to this point, I think it's really big. If they can get out of this game healthy, have that bye week, and as Ben mentioned, get ready for that really big stretch of games, that's going to determine if Georgia's a playoff contender or not.
One other thing I forgot to mention from the last game that kind of you can also look forward is Kentucky tested Kamari Lassiter more than any team had this year. He's a name that hasn't really been mentioned because no one threw to him. Kentucky tried multiple shots down the field. I think they connected on one 24, 25-yard catch against him, but then he also – should have had an interception on an underthrow on a deep ball. So I think that's an aspect. When you look at Vanderbilt, you look at that matchup. Will Shepherd's one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. So that's still going to be an intriguing matchup and should be good for whoever's lined up against him, whether it's Kamari Lassiter. I'd like to see that just because, I'm a big NFL draft guy, and I think that's just one of those matchups you put on film to help your stock for either one of these guys. So it's also a good test because there's going to be some other good receivers later this season. So there's value in that for whoever's lined up against Will. But I just think that's an interesting aspect on defense that and the just the linebacker blitzes that kind of got home in that game for Jamon Dumas-Johnson. That's obviously a look that it seems like Georgia's having some success with, just dialing up blitzes from either the linebacker or cornerback position as well. So just something to continue to watch as Georgia's defense, is trying to live up to a standard that almost no defense can really do, even Georgia's defense. But those are some aspects that you can look at to try to see if they can continue that play against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, you mentioned the passing game and those receivers. That was something that Kirby really stressed on Monday. Very fast receivers for Vanderbilt. So Kamari and really the whole secondary will be tested and see if they show up ready to go. Something else that's happening on Saturday that's going to be something that Georgia fans want to keep an eye on. 5-star defensive lineman Aiden Breelan will be announcing his commitment. A very important target for Georgia, a guy that several big schools are after and after hard. Ben, what can you tell us about Aiden, what we should know going into this commitment, and who are some of those schools that are pushing really hard to land him?
Yeah, so at 24/7 Sports, we have him as the number 6 rated player in the country. I think that makes him, Kipp, correct me if I'm wrong, does that make him the number 1 defensive lineman in the country? I've really talented football player, goes to Mater Dei in California. Georgia obviously already has a commitment from Mater Dei running back Nate Frazier. That's not going to be the reason for Aiden Breelan's decision, but that certainly is a helpful factor for Georgia. The teams in the mix here are the ones that we've talked about: Georgia, Oregon, and Miami. I really think this comes down to Georgia and Oregon. I think that this is a Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning battle through and through for one of the best defensive linemen in the country. As of this recording, I've been told that the decision has not been formally made yet, that this date was put in place so that Aiden didn't want this to drag out to signing day so that things got wild and crazy down the final stretch. So now he's just moved it up to October, and I'm sure this week's getting wild and crazy for him. But he wanted to almost force himself into weighing all of his options and making that decision. So by Saturday, it will be Georgia or Oregon, I think. I would be very surprised if it was Miami. I think that there's reason for both sides to feel confident. I think given the way Georgia is recruiting the defensive line position and who they've really emphasized, I think it's a very important piece for Georgia to land in this class. So I tend to think Georgia will win out in this recruiting battle, but, check in with Dogs 24/7 throughout the end of the week, and hopefully we get you a few nuggets of info before Saturday.
Kipp, if Georgia is able to land Aiden Breelan, just how big of a win would this be for Trey Scott, really for the entire coaching staff to get a guy this talented?
Well, this D-line class was huge. It was, one of the most important positions groups we thought about when looking at this cycle. And yeah, Georgia's recruiting class is still tops in the country, an incredible group. But I mean, as we've seen, you got to have depth there, and you have to stack elite talent there as well. That's kind of been an ongoing talking point when looking at Georgia's defense, is that, yeah, they were able to rotate in, 6-7 guys along that defensive line, but there's no Jalen Carter on that, on that roster right now, or at least a guy that they feel comfortable with playing 20-30 snaps a game. There's no, Jordan Davis out there. These guys that have made a huge impact on Georgia's defense the last couple of years. And Aiden Breelan's, he's that kind of talent level. Is 6'5", 290 pounds. He's just a true interior defensive line prospect that can play all along Georgia's defensive fronts. You can play him at, any of the positions Georgia uses, any of their packages, because he's a multi-sport athlete who can really stay on the field for all 3 downs. And so that's huge. That's something that Georgia kind of desperately needs right now. And I think you add him to a group, guys like Justin Green, Jordan Thomas, Joseph Jonah Janye. That's an elite group, and I mean that's a group that Trey Scott can really work with for the next 3 or 4 years to continue Georgia's defense playing at an elite level in the front.
We'll have that announcement covered along with our game coverage from Georgia Vanderbilt. Georgia men's basketball minute before we get out of here. Big weekend recruiting-wise for them as well. Had a pair of 5-star power forwards, Asa Newell and Darion Reed, in Athens, allowed them to get a chance to go to that game against Kentucky. There was a photo that Asa posted after the fact with him and Kirby Smart. I'm sure that Kirby probably was pushing to help them land him with the basketball team as well. Passing along what I've heard, what seems to be the case when it comes to those guys, I think Georgia feels really good about Asa Newell, who I've mentioned in past podcasts. I think they like where they are with him. Sounds like really Alabama is probably that other team that's pushing the hardest. Texas there as well. I would expect Asa to commit sometime soon. He has not put in a date for that, but it sounds like his recruitment is wrapping up. I believe I mentioned this on last week's podcast, that if Georgia was able to land him, he would be the third highest rated signee that they've ever had, behind Anthony Edwards. And also, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the other guy. He would be the third among the players that Georgia has signed. And it'd be a big commitment, and it'll be something to watch for sure. And then with Darion Reed, it sounds like they're optimistic. I think Alabama is going to be the team to watch there. So he is a guy from Grovetown, Georgia, a guy that not too far. I think they're really pushing for him to stay home and to wind up playing for Georgia. But we'll be covering the men's basketball recruiting just like we have football. And I think there's reason to be excited if you're a Georgia basketball fan with what they're trying to build and what they are trying to do going forward.
I'm curious. I got to know who the other one is. Is it KCP? Is it?
Yeah, it was Kentavious Caldwell Pope.
Okay.
I could not pull it from the brain. Mark Fox with a big recruiting win. Who would have thought?
Don't forget Lou Williams back in the day, man. Lou Williams, if he had arrived in Athens to actually play, would have been a completely different storyline for Georgia then, but was not to be.
No doubt. Lou Williams and Mike Mercer. I grew up going to South Gwinnett basketball games, watching them play on national TV.
We're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Appreciate everyone who tuned in live to watch this and everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. If you haven't already, be sure to go to dogs247.com and subscribe. You'll have all of the content about this team, all of our recruiting notes, getting ready for another busy week, no doubt. Also go to Dogs247 on YouTube. Subscribe there. Go check out the videos of these podcasts as well as Kirby Smart's press conferences and our interviews with players. So for Kipp Adams and Benjamin Wolk, I am Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.